Welcome to Chapter 2 of the 2022 M-STEP Test Administration Training. In this chapter, I will discuss the tasks that need to be done during testing. First, I will discuss how to get started with the test administration, and then we'll dive into tasks done during test administration. I will also spend some time going over common problems that come up during testing and how you should address them, and then end with resources that are available to you and how to find them. As we get started, it's important to identify the responsibilities of assessment coordinators during the test administration. The most important responsibility is communication. The assessment coordinator is the central point of contact between test administrators, technology coordinators, OEAA if there's anything that needs to be addressed with us, and DRC. So making sure everyone is on the same page as far as testing schedules, building or district policy, student testing devices, and so on is very important. Next, the assessment coordinator is a resource to answer questions that will come from test administrators, proctors, technology coordinators, or other school staff. Assessment coordinators should monitor for test irregularities and either lead or provide support for any investigations, help with submitting incident reports if necessary, and gathering any documentation that is needed. The other responsibility included here is the need to monitor during testing. Make sure that test administrators are administering the test in accordance with their training and are following required policies and procedures. This includes making sure testing rooms do not contain queuing materials, student devices are managed appropriately, and the building's cell phone and electronic device policies are followed. Also, the assessment coordinator manages printing and distribution of test tickets, as well as the secure handling and storage of all secure materials. Finally, assessment coordinators can monitor test completion in the DRC Insight portal. The test administrators' directions and manuals have all of the test administration policy information that test administrators need to know. They have the calculator and scratch paper policies, information about supports and accommodations, handling of secure materials, and information about incident reporting. Test administrators are required to read the test administrator's directions and manual document for the test mode, grade, and content area for all tests they will administer. The test administrator's directions and manual documents are specific to test mode and grade. This means that there are separate documents for online testing in each grade and separate documents for paper-pencil testing in each grade. TTS is available for directions only on all tests and test forms. Building or district assessment coordinators are responsible for deciding whether to use TTS for directions in their building or district. The test directions document that test administrators use during testing includes a section to follow when administering with TTS for directions and a separate section to use when administering without TTS for directions. It will be important that test administrators review the test directions prior to testing so that they know where to find the directions that they will use. On all tests, regardless of whether TTS for directions is being used, the launching of the Insight application, handing out test tickets, and the test selection, welcome, and audio check screens are completed together. Then the directions break into sections for using TTS for directions and not using TTS for directions. If using the TTS for directions, students need headphones and will listen to the directions with TTS after the audio check screen. There is an important note for any test session being administered without TTS for directions, and it is important that test administrators are made aware of this ahead of the test administration. The audio check screen exists on all tests, and the only way to move past the audio check screen is to play the audio check and verify that the sound is working. For students who are not using TTS for directions or as a designated support, don't need any audio and may not have headphones, but they will still need to play this audio check. Directions are included in the test directions that test administrators read for this. Again, make sure test administrators read these directions before administering the test. So if a student does not have headphones and the device they are testing on has the volume turned on, then when they play the audio check, it will play the sound in the classroom. To avoid this, you should make sure that the device is muted before launching Insight. This way, the audio will not play out in the testing room. Another important note is that for students who are using TTS as a designated support, will still need the audio check and they need to use headphones. It is typical that test sessions have some students using TTS as a designated support and some who are not. There are different directions in the test directions for test administrators to follow on the audio check screen based on whether there are or are not some students using TTS as a designated support in their test session. It is very important that test administrators read the directions before testing day so that they are prepared and know what to do. For paper-pencil testing, test administrators follow the directions that are in the test directions and manuals documents. There are not different options for how the test is administered. But regardless of which method of administration, it is important that all test directions are read and followed explicitly to ensure a standardized administration of the test. Next, I'm going to spend some time going into some policies and procedures and tasks that need to be done during testing. First, make sure that everyone knows the scratch paper and graph paper policy related to the test that they will administer. All used scratch and graph paper are secure materials. These documents will have specific test content written on them, and they must be securely collected and destroyed after testing. Make sure that students do not turn scratch paper in by passing down rows or in any method that would allow a student to view what is written on another student's paper. This is secure information. Test administrators should collect scratch paper and graph paper individually after testing. If a break is taken during testing and a student will resume the same test and test part at a later time, then in order for his or her scratch paper to be returned, it will need to have the student's name on it. Make sure that your test administrators require students to write their names on the top of their scratch paper or graph paper when they hand it out. That way, everyone will have access to what they need throughout the test. Graph paper is allowed for grades 6 and 7. It must be blank graph paper. M-STEP graph paper is delivered to schools with the initial materials according to pre-ID counts, and it is also available on the M-STEP webpage. The M-STEP scratch paper policy is in the appendices in the test administrator's directions and manuals, the test administration manual, and it is posted on the M-STEP webpage. The calculator policy has not changed for mathematics at all. Grades 3, 4, and 5 cannot use a calculator, even as an accommodation, because it changes the construct of the test. And grade 6 and 7 calculators are not allowed for anyone on Part 1 of the paper-pencil assessment. For students in grades 6 and 7 testing online, the calculators are embedded into the assessment on items for which they are available, and handheld calculators are only allowed as an accommodation. But there is something new in the calculator policy because calculators are allowed on the science assessment for all items on both parts in all tested grades, grades 5, 8, and 11. For grade 5, students use the basic calculator, and grades 8 and 11 use the scientific calculator. It is important that test administrators actively monitor testing. This will help reduce the potential for any testing irregularities, and it will ensure that all students are provided a quiet and orderly environment for testing. Active monitoring of a test session looks like a test administrator who is moving through the room unobtrusively observing students while testing. The test administrator should maintain a view of all students at all times, and all of his or her attention should remain on testing at all times throughout the test session. It's also important that test administrators and proctors avoid doing anything that could distract a student from testing. Things like talking to other staff members, Even if the conversation is work or testing related, this needs to be avoided. Reading books or newspapers should absolutely be avoided because attention must remain on testing at all times. Eating, working on computers or a phone, or grading papers are all potentially distracting to the test environment and should be avoided. Some schools use video surveillance cameras in rooms that are used for testing. For safety and security, if video surveillance cameras are already in place in a testing room and are used to maintain security, they are allowed to be used during the test session. Cameras should be directed away from the test items, and any recording of a test session must be deleted as soon as possible after the test session. The Assessment Integrity Guide is updated each year. I'm going to highlight a few important topics here, but it is required that assessment coordinators read the entire document before test administration. On this slide, I will highlight the cell phone policy, academic posters, and the arrangement of student workstations. According to the AIG, student cell phones or other electronic devices must be powered off and stored away from the student work area during testing. It is the responsibility of district and building assessment coordinators to make sure that test administrators are aware of how your district or building will implement this policy and that this policy is enforced. All academic material that is posted on classroom walls must be covered or removed during the test administration. Make sure you emphasize this in your training. It is something that MDE has seen in several instances. This is a testing irregularity that requires the student's test to be invalidated or completely retaken, which is not an ideal situation for anyone. And computers or workstations must be arranged so that students are not able to view other students' work during testing. All test administrators must be trained in the administration policies for the M-STEP administration, read the Assessment Integrity Guide or complete the Assessment Security Training modules, and read the test administrator's directions and manual documents before administering a test. They must also sign the OEAA Security Compliance Form before administering any M-STEP assessment. Test administrators are selected from the list on this slide, which is taken from the Assessment Integrity Guide. Test administrators can be teachers or other licensed educational administrators, paraprofessionals, or non-licensed administrative personnel or substitute teachers. Anyone who administers the test must complete the required training and complete the OEAA Security Compliance Form before administration. If test administrators are using the test monitoring application, they will need to log into the DRC Insight portal before beginning the test session to allow students to access the test. This image shows how to access the test monitoring application and where test administrators find the monitoring code and allow access. The red arrow at the top of the page shows how to get to the test monitoring application. Users select the My Applications tab at the top of the screen and then select Test Monitoring in the drop-down menu. Test administrators may not have all the options listed in this screenshot depending on their access permissions. Next, the monitoring code is highlighted on the screen. This is the code that students need to enter on their welcome screen to access the test. The button to allow student access is also highlighted. Once students have been provided access to their test, this is what the test monitoring dashboard will look like, with student information obfuscated for privacy. The test administrator can view student names, assessments, testing status, and progress through the test. Since CAT tests are adaptive and students receive different items and quantities of items, the progress column displays NA on CAT tests. This screen monitors test completion for all students. It displays tests that are not started, in progress, or completed. It does not monitor testing during test sessions. Users can monitor test completion in the DRC Insight portal on the student status screen by grade and by content. Users can monitor progress toward completion throughout the test administration using this screen. As a note, the screen shows progress toward completion of students who are assigned to test sessions. It does not identify students who are expected to test by the MDE but were not assigned to the test session. Assessment coordinators must make sure that all students who are expected to test are pre-ID'd in the secure site and assigned to all of the appropriate test sessions, either through the secure site or in the DRC Insight portal. When ending a test session for an online administration, all test tickets, test rosters, scratch paper, and graph paper, if used, must be collected to be securely destroyed. Test administrators should also be sure that students exit the testing engine. In paper-pencil administrations, test booklets, answer documents, scratch paper, and graph paper, if used, should be collected individually. These documents should not be passed down rows. Be sure to verify that all answer documents, test booklets, and scratch paper are collected from all students. Test administrators must verify that all materials are collected before students are dismissed and the test session ended. All secure materials are then returned to secure storage or destruction. Materials need to be collected after the test administrations for both online and paper-pencil administrations. Be sure that signed security compliance forms are collected from all staff involved in test administration. Also, final copies of testing schedules must be completed and collected. These should be kept for 3 years after the test administration. For paper-pencil administrations, all test booklets and answer documents must be collected. Any used answer document must have the correct barcode label affixed, and any accommodations used need to be filled in on the answer document. Also be sure that student information is completed and matches the information on the barcode label, in the event the barcode label becomes damaged or falls off the document. The test administration manual includes detailed instructions for materials return. Things come up during testing. There can be student behaviors that impact testing. Students sometimes submit a fixed form test on accident or have trouble logging into the test. If you have any problems during testing, there are things you can do to resolve the issue, and you'll be able to find information for how to resolve most issues in the TAM. But remember, we are here to help you ensure that you have a successful test administration that results in valid test scores for the students in your building. Do not hesitate to reach out to us for support when you run into any challenges. Most of the time, we can help you get things back on track with minimal impact to testing. So in this section, I'm going to highlight the most common types of things that we see and what you should do if it happens in your school or district. Perhaps the most common problem that happens in the online administration is a student submitting a test before completing it. When this happens, if there are 5 or fewer questions answered, contact the call center at 1-877-560-8378 and select option 2. They can get that unlocked for you. If there are more than 5 questions answered, then an incident report is required. Just submit the incident report and we will review it and contact you to help you resolve the issue. Another common problem is if a student becomes ill or is removed from the test session before completing the test. For an online administration, collect the student's test ticket and instruct the student to pause and exit the test. The test may be resumed in a later test session using the original test ticket. For a paper-pencil administration, the test administrator should collect the test materials and flag the last question answered. The test can then be resumed during a makeup session. Students testing on Chromebook who have the wrong keyboard setting, US International Keyboard, will not be able to use the quotation marks or apostrophes while in text boxes. To resolve this issue before testing begins, choose Settings in the Chromebook and then choose Keyboard Settings and be sure US Keyboard is selected. Have the student click outside of the text box, Then press Ctrl, Shift, Spacebar, which will bring up the option to select the US keyboard setting. In the online administration, there may be an issue with Insight disconnections or other technical errors. This can be due to a local connectivity issue or a network issue, or it may be an issue that needs to be resolved with DRC. So the first step in any situation of a technical issue while testing online is to contact your local technology coordinator. If the technology coordinator cannot resolve the problem, then they should contact DRC customer support, and if necessary, the district assessment coordinators should submit an incident report if the problem cannot be solved by the technology coordinator or DRC's customer support. Be sure that students are not directed to continue testing while experiencing any technology difficulties during testing. MDE does not unlock or regenerate tests due to unaddressed technology issues after a test has been completed. I've just gone through a few of the most common scenarios that can come up during testing. Make sure to review your test administration manual if you encounter these or any other issues during testing. During testing, things come up and you may have a need to submit an incident report. It's important that you know how to handle this if it happens. First, a testing irregularity is any deviation from any test policy during test administration. There are many things that can cause a testing irregularity, and they're not necessarily that someone has done something wrong. Some examples of what a testing irregularity looks like may be listed here. Students could engage in prohibitive behaviors, like using or accessing a cell phone or electronic device, or copying or cheating on the test. Testing irregularities may be the result of errors with designated supports or accommodations, either if something was assigned when it should not have been, or not assigned when it should have been. There are different ways that incident reports are resolved, and it is always specific to the events that occurred. But some things that might happen is the test could be unlocked or regenerated. The note here is to remind you that unlocking a test means the student can continue where they left off, whereas a regeneration erases all of the student's responses and they have to completely restart. Next, a test can be invalidated, such as being marked Do Not Score or prohibited behavior. If a testing irregularity occurs, it's important that you follow these steps to respond to it. Start by getting the facts. What happened, who was involved, and what was the impact to testing? Next, get statements from staff involved when warranted. Once you know what's happened from all of the involved parties, then you submit your incident report. Incident reports should be submitted within 2 school days of the testing irregularity or from the day you were notified of the testing irregularity. You don't need to have all of the documentation ready to submit before submitting the incident report. You just need to be able to describe the testing irregularity and who was involved. The incident reporting guide that is in the Test Administration Manual can help you through this process and give you some ideas about what to expect for a response. The TAM's Incident Reporting Guide includes all of this information in detail, so be sure that you review that section of the TAM before the testing window begins. But here I'm going to highlight some important information from the Incident Reporting Guide. First, I want to highlight that any testing irregularity is expected to be reported within 2 school days, either within 2 school days of the testing irregularity itself, or within 2 school days of you being notified of the testing irregularity. Remember, you must report all testing irregularities. Do not neglect to report a testing irregularity if it was not reported within 2 school days. This is to ensure that irregularities are reported in a timely manner so that we can work with you to appropriately resolve the issue. Next, I want to highlight the requirements for incident reports that are due to an error in the administration of a designated support or accommodation. These are the most common incident reports we receive, and the vast majority of those incidents are incidents where a student completed a test without a required designated support or accommodation. If a designated support that should have been provided wasn't provided, then the school must submit a signed form from the parent indicating the reason for the need to retest and permission to retest. If you have been involved in this type of incident in the past, then you will be aware that MDE has a template that you use to provide the parent. You complete the grade content area designated support, and then the parent decides which option and signs the form. This form is available on the secure site at the top of the incident reporting tool. Next, the educator who is responsible for day-to-day instruction in the content area needs to sign a statement that affirms that the student uses that designated support as part of their daily instruction. There is not a form for this. The educator can write or type a statement as simple as, "I affirm that," insert the student's name, uses and lists the designated support as part of their daily instruction, also include the content area, and then sign the statement. For testing irregularities where an accommodation that is assigned in the student's IEP or Section 504 plan was not administered, the signed parent form is still required, and you will also need to upload the appropriate page or pages from the student's IEP or Section 504 plan. Only upload the page or pages that indicate required testing accommodations. Please note here that something that is considered a designated support on M-STEP can be administered as a required accommodation, such as TTS items only. This is technically a designated support for M-STEP, but an IEP team may include TTS or read aloud as an accommodation on the IEP. In situations like these, then this is a required accommodation and the procedures for accommodations should be followed. There are 3 instances that require the incident report be submitted on the day that the irregularity occurs in order to regenerate the test. The first instance is if a student becomes ill and goes home on test day. This is for those situations where a student sits to complete an entire test and then you find out or figure out later that the student was ill enough to have to go home sick that day. Again, the incident must be reported by 11:59 p.m. on the day it occurs. The second instance is when a student begins a test and submits it while spending fewer than 15 minutes total in the test. Again, you must submit the incident report on the day the irregularity occurred. The last instance is if you have a student who has prescribed medication but does not take the medication on test day. Again, it must be submitted on the day of the irregularity. There is required documentation, but before I get to that, know that you can submit the incident report without this documentation so that it is submitted on the same day, and then gather the documentation after the incident is reported. You just have to get the incident submitted on the same day. We can help you with getting the documentation in a timely manner, but only if you initially submit the incident on the day the irregularity occurs. So for all of these situations, you need documentation that the parent is providing permission to take the test again. This is required in any instance of a regeneration. Next, you need to submit verification of the incident. For students who become ill, this should typically be an attendance record indicating that the student went home ill. For students who didn't take their medication, a statement from a teacher, staff member, or parent who has reason to know whether the student took their medication is sufficient. And for students who spend fewer than 15 minutes testing, MDE can verify through the DRC Insight portal once the test has been submitted. MDE can only see the time spent testing after the test has been submitted. Incident reports are submitted through the secure site. Users select the Student Assessments tab at the top of the page and then Incident Reports in the drop-down menu. The contact information is pre-populated based on the M-STEP Assessment Coordinator who is assigned in the EEM. Once you have selected the test cycle and entity information, select the grade, content area, and testing mode. Based on these selections, the incident category dropdown will update. Then select the incident subcategory. Directions about which category and subcategory should be used based on your situation can be found in the Incident Reporting table in the MSTEP Test Administration Manual. This table is organized based on the incident categories listed in the drop-down menu of the Secure site. After you have selected the category and subcategory, you can select your requested action. Depending on the incident category and subcategory that you've selected, student names may be required. Student names that are populated are based on students who were pre-identified for testing. Then a description of the incident is included. Once you've included all of the information about your testing irregularity, be sure to save and submit your incident report. If you do not submit the incident report, MDE cannot respond to your incident. You can find more information about how to use the Incident Reporting tool on the Secure Site training page at www.michigan.gov/Secure Site Training. I wanted to include this slide about the Read by Grade 3 legislation just to make sure everyone is aware of this important information. There have not been any changes to the preliminary scale scores used to determine students who meet requirements, need support, or are eligible for retention. You can see here students scoring higher than 1271 will meet the requirements of the law. Students scoring between 1253 and 1271 will be identified as need supports, and students scoring below 1253 will be eligible for retention. According to the requirements of the legislation, letters will be sent by CEPI directly to parents of students who are eligible for retention. Schools will be able to view student preliminary scores within 48 hours of the student submitting the test, and usually by the next day. There will be an indicator on the Grade 3 ELA reports so that schools can monitor the preliminary reports to know which students are eligible for retention before parents begin receiving their letters. Here I'm going to remind you about some of the resources that are available to you before, during, and after testing. If you get a chance, go to the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP and look through the documents there. There is a lot of good information available, and it's sorted according to what's new, the current assessment administration, supports and accommodations, content-specific information, where you'll find information about the ELA test or the science test, and so on. And there are also sections for assessment training and reporting and more, so it's organized into the topic of information that you might be looking for. Take a look. There's a lot of information out there. The Test Administration Manual includes all of the test administration policies, procedures, supports and accommodations information, materials management requirements, and more. Make sure you read this document so that you are prepared for anything that may come up during testing. There are also checklists that you can use to make sure you're getting everything done, and they're sorted into a before testing checklist, during testing checklist, and after testing checklist. The TAM also includes detailed directions for reporting any testing irregularities in the Incident Reporting Guide. Make sure you're familiar with this guide because it'll help you if anything comes up during testing. Test administrators are required to read the test administrator's directions and manual for the grade and content areas they will administer, according to test mode, which means online or paper pencil. All of the information that test administrators need to know, including policies, requirements, and the scratch paper and calculator policies, are in these documents. For online testing, there are directions provided to use when administering the assessment with TTS for directions and for administration without TTS for directions. It is important that test administrators read the document before test administration so they know which directions they need to follow. Test administrators' directions and manual documents are included in initial material orders according to pre-ID counts. If additional documents are needed, they can be printed from the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP. Remember to make sure to visit the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP for more resources. I'm just highlighting a few of the most important things that are out there for you now. The updated Assessment Integrity Guide is available. The AIG contains important information about test security and mandatory assessment administration guidelines for all Michigan State assessments. The new Assessment Coordinator Training Guide provides training on each task to be done for administering Michigan State assessments, organized into before, during, and after testing. The lists of important dates are available as PDFs, Google Calendars, and as the Excel spreadsheet. These are all accessed through the MSTEP webpage by selecting List of Important Dates in the Current Assessment Administration section. This takes you to the assessment calendar page that includes all formats of the important dates. The approved Insight Tools poster is also available on the MSTEP webpage. This is the only allowed poster that schools can post in the classroom during testing to cue students on the use of tools in the online assessment. Some schools like to use this as a reminder for students during testing. If so, just remember it can be posted, but not at each student's desk or workstation. There's a lot more. Take a look for yourself at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP. Make sure you're signed up for the Spotlight. This is the place to go to find out important information about assessment and accountability throughout the year. It comes out every Thursday afternoon. If you aren't already signed up, go to the MSTEP webpage at www.michigan.gov/MSTEP. Scroll down until you see the Spotlight logo, click on it, and you can sign up there. Thanks for joining me for the second chapter of the 2022 MSTEP Test Administration Training. Our contact information is available here. If you have any questions, send an email to mde-oeaa@michigan.gov, or you can call 877-560-8378 and follow the prompts. Also, if you have ideas, suggestions, or ways that you manage your test administration tasks that you think other schools might find helpful, send us an email. We include those in Spotlight articles, and all of the helpful hints that you see in the TAM came from tips from folks from the field. Let us know what's working for you. There will be another chapter of this training to cover what needs to be done after testing. Make sure you watch the Spotlight for when that is available. Thanks for watching.